"The Overseer, I am applying to leave this world." As soon as the words left her mouth, the mechanical electronic voice of the Overseer responded instantly. The host's mission was to redeem the devoted second male lead, Ethan Shelton. The mission was successfully completed 5 years ago. However, because the host chose to refuse departure at that time, the only way to reopen the time corridor now is to facilitate a marriage between Ethan Shelton and someone else. Hearing this answer, Evangeline Quinn froze for a moment before asking, "Does it matter who I match him with?" "No, you have 15 days. If the mission fails, the host will remain in this world forever." No one knew that Evangeline did not belong here. She had been brought to this fictional world by the Overseer. Ethan Shelton was the devoted second male lead of this story. He was obsessively in love with the original female lead, willing to sacrifice everything for her. He once told the female lead, "Serafina, if you marry me, the Shelton estate is your dowry. If you marry him, the Shelton estate is your wedding gift." That single sentence had moved millions of readers to tears. But the female lead's destiny was to love the protagonist, and in the end, she would only choose him. Ethan was left trapped in a youthful, obsessive love, unable to obtain what he desired, destined to grow old in loneliness. Evangeline's mission was to save him and change his ending. She entered his world, accompanying him when he was sad, encouraging him when he was despondent, and stepping up to protect him whenever he was in danger. Countless times when he needed someone, she was there the moment he turned around. Ethan once asked her why she was so good to him. At that time, she looked at him with eyes full of affection and certainty. "Because I came here for you." It took her 7 years to successfully complete the mission. Yet, when the Overseer told her she could go home, she couldn't bear to leave Ethan and resolutely chose to stay. They became a couple and spent a period of time in bliss. Then came the news that the original female lead, Serafina York, had divorced the protagonist. The moment Serafina reappeared in Ethan's life, his heart gravitated toward her again as if by destiny. He completely forgot the promises he had made to Evangeline that she would be the only one for the rest of his life. Since his love for Serafina was an unchangeable fate, and Serafina had seemingly broken free from the plot to return to Ethan after her divorce, Evangeline decided she would be the one to bring them together this time. That way, she could return home as she wished, and he could be with the woman he truly loved. The sound of the door opening pulled her thoughts back. She looked over and saw the tall, elegant Ethan Shelton, with Serafina York following closely behind him. Seeing her gaze linger on Serafina, Ethan instinctively moved to shield the woman behind him. "Sierra's neighborhood hasn't been safe lately. She needs to stay with us for a few days," he explained gently, as if afraid she would be angry, but his tone made it clear that the decision had already been made. In the past, Evangeline would indeed have been upset, but now she was remarkably calm. "All right." Ethan was stunned by her reaction. He hadn't expected her to be so composed. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond, but his concern for Serafina took over. As he led Serafina upstairs, he offered a subconscious explanation. "Eva, everything between Sierra and me is in the past. I'm her only friend here, which is why I brought her back. Please don't be angry." Serafina, who had been hidden behind him the whole time, poked her head out with a sweet smile. "That's right, Evangeline. Ethan and I really don't have anything." Before she could finish, Evangeline cut her off. She looked away with a faint expression of understanding that bordered on indifference. "I know, you're just friends. I won't overthink it, and I won't be angry." Her excessive generosity left both of them momentarily surprised. However, neither of them dwelled on it, and they headed upstairs. Just like that, Serafina moved into Ethan's villa quite openly. Since Evangeline intended to match them anyway, she was happy with this arrangement. What she didn't expect was that, while she was still thinking about how to push them together, Serafina called her out that very night and deliberately threw herself down the stairs right in front of her. Evangeline's heart tightened, and she instinctively reached out to stop her, but it was too late. Before she could understand why Serafina would do such a thing, a massive force shoved her aside. As she stumbled to regain her balance, she saw a figure flash past and rush downstairs. It was Ethan. It happened so fast that Evangeline didn't even have time to process the situation before Ethan was cradling a tearful Serafina in his arms, his face etched with heartache. "Ethan, Don't blame Evangeline. It's all my fault. You two are a couple, and I shouldn't have moved in to disturb you. I'll leave right away." She looked like a victim who suffered in silence, even pretending to defend Evangeline. This caused the usually gentle Ethan to explode in anger for the first time. "I told you Sierra and I are in the past. I only took her in because of our old friendship. Why can't you just tolerate her?" "I didn't." Evangeline's face went pale. She never imagined Serafina would be so ruthless to herself. But the moment she began to explain, she saw him carrying the woman away, having no intention of listening to her. After a brief silence, Evangeline felt a sharp sting in her heart. Forget it. He had already decided she was the villain. What was the point of explaining? When Evangeline arrived at Serafina's hospital room, she happened to see Ethan through the window, caring for her with utmost devotion. "Ethan, I suddenly have a craving for that millet porridge from the bistro downtown." She smiled shyly, and he rubbed her head dotingly. "You little foodie, I'll go buy it for you." Seeing him about to come out, Evangeline quickly stepped aside to avoid his gaze. Fortunately, he was in a hurry and didn't notice her. She knew that bistro. It was across the city, and because it was famous, the lines were always incredibly long. It was far away and required significant effort and time. Yet, because of one sentence from Serafina, he went. Indeed, as long as it was something his beloved wanted, he would do it no matter how much trouble it caused. Watching his figure disappear around the corner, she gave a self-deprecating smile and entered the room. When she entered, the smile on Serafina's face didn't fade. Instead, her eyes flashed with even more triumph. "Ethan was afraid I'd be disturbed, so he booked this entire floor for me. It's actually just a minor injury, but he made such a fuss and insisted on hiring the best doctors. Evangeline Quinn, if I hadn't chosen the wrong person back then, the position of Ethan's girlfriend would never have been yours. If you're smart, you'll pack your bags and leave right now." She expected these words to spark anger, but Evangeline just watched her quietly. She remained calm and even smiled. "Serafina, there's no need to frame me anymore. I came here today because I want to cooperate with you. From today on, I will do everything in my power to bring you and Ethan Shelton together until you are married." "What do you mean?" Serafina was stunned by her words. Once she recovered, she sneered, "You, having such good intentions?" Evangeline didn't explain further. She gave her a deep look and turned to leave. "Believe it or not, I'll prove it with my actions." The next day, when Ethan brought Serafina back from the hospital, he was shocked by what he saw. "What are you doing?" His tone was full of suspicion. In contrast, Evangeline was perfectly composed. "I was careless and neglected our guest last time, so I cleared out the master bedroom for Sierra. I heard she likes Rococo style, so I replaced all the furniture with things she likes." Looking at the completely transformed decor, Ethan inexplicably remembered when Evangeline first moved in. Back then, she had been so enthusiastic about decorating this home, changing the villa's cold black and white style by placing carefully picked trinkets, potted plants, and their photos in every corner. She said it made it feel like a home, but Serafina's taste was the exact opposite. Rococo was ornate and intricate. Although it was luxurious, he felt it lacked warmth. He opened his mouth to speak, but his gaze was drawn to a floor mattress in the master bedroom. Evangeline noticed his gaze and explained with a smile, "Isn't Sierra afraid of thunder? You used to rush to her place to accompany her. Now that we're all together, it's more convenient. You two can just sleep in the same room." The shock in Ethan's eyes intensified. His pupils constricted in disbelief. "Eva, what are you saying? You want me and Sierra to sleep together? Didn't you say you and Sierra are in the past?" She smiled, her implication clear. He felt something was deeply wrong, but before he could speak, Serafina's expression changed. Tears instantly filled her eyes. "Ethan, are you unwilling to stay with me? You used to stand under my window during storms." Large tears began to fall. In that moment, Ethan couldn't think about anything else. He quickly agreed. Perhaps out of guilt, Ethan handed Evangeline 2 tickets to the opera house before heading to the office the next morning. "You've always wanted to see an opera. Let's go together after work today." "Sure." Her expression remained unchanged. She took the tickets with a smile and watched his car drive away. The next second, she turned around and placed the tickets in front of Serafina, who was eating breakfast. "Go with him." Serafina took the tickets hesitantly. Seeing that Evangeline had no intention of taking them back, she finally realized the other woman truly intended to set them up. Immediately, her smile became even more triumphant. At least you're self-aware. If you can't win, you give up. She chuckled, stood up, and went upstairs. For once, she didn't make things difficult for Evangeline. She spent the day dressing up and left when it was time for the show. Meanwhile, Ethan had arrived at the opera house early. Looking at the posters of the lead performers at the entrance, he couldn't help but recall when he and Evangeline first got together a few years ago. Evangeline loved opera and had invited him many times. Each time, he had gently declined, saying, "Maybe next time." He had said "next time" over and over again until today. A wave of guilt washed over him. He decided to wait in a long line at the concession stand to buy some snacks that Evangeline liked. After buying the snacks, he saw a familiar figure walking toward him. The smile on his face froze as he realized something was wrong. From the outfit to the silhouette, and then the face that became clear as she approached it wasn't Evangeline. It was Serafina. She smiled shyly and stepped forward to take his arm. Evangeline wasn't feeling well, so she gave the tickets to me. "Ethan, let's go in." To her surprise, Ethan's face darkened. "Not feeling well? What's wrong?" He looked like he was about to turn around and leave right then. Realizing this, Serafina quickly held him back and spoke in a soft, persuasive voice. "It's just a minor cold. She'll be fine after some rest." "Ethan, I've heard about this performance for so long, and I've been looking forward to it. Won't you watch it with me?" Her soft voice calmed his restless heart. He could never seem to refuse her. After a moment of hesitation, he nodded and entered the theater with her. The smile returned to her face. She chatted incessantly all the way to their seats. Once the performance began, Serafina provided a detailed commentary on almost every scene. Ethan, who used to put her first in everything, was perfunctory throughout the entire show. He nodded occasionally and offered brief responses, clearly distracted. As soon as it ended, he drove her straight back to the villa without saying a word. When he pushed open the front door, he didn't see a sickly Evangeline. Instead, he saw a healthy-looking Evangeline watering flowers with a spray bottle. "I thought you said you weren't feeling well?" Ethan's voice was chillingly cold. His questioning tone didn't frighten her at all. "Yes, I'm much better now," she replied casually without stopping her work. After a pause, she looked up at them with a sincere gaze. "How was it? Did you have a good time?" Ethan could tell she wasn't sick at all. He had wondered if she had been forced to give up the tickets, but seeing her chatting so cheerfully, a wave of frustration blocked his chest. "We had a great time." He ground out the words and went straight to his room with a dark expression. Evangeline was confused by his attitude. She couldn't understand why he was angry when she was helping him be with the person he truly loved. Before she could figure it out, Serafina's piercing, angry voice reached her ears. "Evangeline Quinn, is this your way of bringing us together? Are you playing games, using this push and pull tactic to get Ethan's attention? Fine. If you want to play dirty, don't blame me for what happens next." The next second, she collapsed to the floor, clutching her stomach and screaming in pain. "It hurts, my stomach hurts." Ethan, who hadn't gone far, panicked when he heard the screams. He rushed back out, scooped Serafina off the floor, and asked frantically, "Sira, what's wrong?" She huddled in his arms, her eyes blurred with tears. "I don't know. I just drank the water Evangeline gave me, and my stomach suddenly started hurting." "I told you, Sira, and I are nothing. I only let her stay here because of our past friendship. Why do you have to be so cruel to her? Didn't you give her the tickets yourself? Why would you attack her now?" His eyes were bloodshot as he picked her up. When he turned to the bodyguards, his voice was ice cold. "Take her outside and make her stand there. She stays there until Sira is willing to forgive her." Following the order, the bodyguards dragged Evangeline to the courtyard and stood watch nearby. She stood there in a daze, neither begging for mercy nor admitting to any wrongdoing. Heavy dark clouds gathered overhead, and soon, large raindrops began to fall, soaking her thin clothes completely. A nearby servant looked on with pity. "Miss Quinn, why don't you explain?" Serafina hadn't even tried to hide her actions, and Evangeline hadn't handed her any water. The staff saw through the clumsy framing, yet Ethan Shelton took Serafina's word as gospel and condemned her instantly. "Would he believe me if I did?" she replied with a bitter smile. Since the first time she met Ethan, he had always been gentle and composed. The few times he lost control were always because of Serafina York. The name Serafina York was the untouchable, pure first love in his heart. Who could possibly compare? The sky grew darker, but the rain showed no signs of stopping. The early autumn rain, carried by the wind, brought a chill that made her shiver uncontrollably. Rain blurred her vision and clouded her consciousness. In a daze, she didn't know how long she had been standing there. As dawn approached, she could no longer hold on and collapsed to the ground. When she woke up, she was back in her room. Ethan was sitting by her bed, gently blowing on a bowl of medicine before offering it to her. "I'm sorry. The staff told me. Sierra poured the water herself. I misunderstood you." She remained calm, just as she had been the day he brought Serafina back. She showed no emotion. Ethan didn't think much of it, assuming she was still angry about the misunderstanding. He spoke softly. "Sierra just went through a bad breakup and feels very insecure. Please don't hold it against her." Seeing her quietly drinking the medicine, he added, "I was in the wrong this time. It's your birthday in a few days. I'll give you the surprise you've always wanted." Evangeline still didn't speak, but her movements paused slightly when she heard about the surprise. She hid her bitter smile behind the medicine bowl. The surprise she wanted most now was to leave him. Time flew by, and soon it was Evangeline's birthday. Many people attended the party, and it was clear Ethan had put a lot of effort into the event. The atmosphere was lively as guests mingled. The highlight of the party was the gift-giving segment. The guests were all wealthy and prominent figures, and the array of gifts was staggering. When it was Ethan's turn, he mysteriously invited her onto the stage. Then, in front of everyone, he dropped to one knee. A servant pushed out a massive bouquet of red roses. In the center of the roses was a velvet jewelry box. He took the box, opened it, and looked at her with eyes full of devotion. "Eva, will you marry me?" Surrounded by the crowd, Evangeline was stunned as she looked at the diamond ring sparkling under the lights. So, this was what he called the surprise she wanted most. As the crowd began to cheer, Evangeline's mind was a chaotic mess. She opened her mouth to answer, but a sudden scream erupted from the other side of the room. Someone fainted. Ethan instinctively looked in that direction, and what he saw made his pupils shrink. "Sierra," he cried out. Frantically snapped the ring box shut, and rushed toward her without waiting for Evangeline's answer. He scooped up the unconscious Serafina and hurried away. In the end, Evangeline had to apologize and see the guests out before returning home alone. The door to the master bedroom was open. As she walked upstairs, the scene inside hit her directly. Ethan was looking at Serafina with extreme tenderness, his hand stroking her hair with lingering affection. When his eyes met Evangeline's, he reflexively withdrew his hand. "I just saw she was unconscious and was fixing her hair. Eva, don't misunderstand." He stood up, walked out of the room, and closed the door, offering a low-voiced explanation. "By the way, you haven't answered me yet. Will you marry me?" The change of topic was clumsy. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply handed him a glass of water. "Get some rest first. It's late." After watching him finish the water and go to wash up, she hurried to Serafina's room and knocked. "Serafina, I know you're faking it. I just drugged Ethan. Now is the perfect time to make your move. Get in there." After washing up, Ethan dried his hair and walked into the bedroom, only to find the lights were out. He could see a small figure lying in the bed under the moonlight. For some reason, despite having just showered, he felt parched. He lay down beside her and naturally wrapped his arm around her waist. As he leaned in for a kiss, the scent of rose perfume hit him. But Evangeline never used perfume. His movements froze. He abruptly pulled away and flicked on the light. When he saw who was in the bed, his breath hitched. "Serafina?" In the living room, Evangeline remained calm, showing no panic after being caught. Opposite her, Ethan's face was dark, and he stood in silent confrontation with them. I really just walked into the wrong room by mistake." Serafina, wrapped in a blanket with tears in her eyes, looked frightened as she whispered her explanation. But Ethan's gaze remained fixed on Evangeline. He clearly didn't believe the excuse. She remained composed, echoing Serafina's words. "Sierra isn't feeling well. It's normal for her to be confused about the rooms." Ethan remained silent, but Serafina suddenly tugged at his sleeve. He looked down and saw her with tear streaks on her face. She cleverly changed the subject. "I'm scared to sleep alone. Ethan, can you stay with me tonight?" After a moment of hesitation, he couldn't refuse her request and agreed. The incident was brushed aside. In the middle of the night, Evangeline's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Ethan. "What exactly happened tonight? Why did I feel so strange after drinking that water you gave me? And why did Sierra show up in my bed?" Evangeline didn't panic. She thought for a moment and replied. "The party was crowded. Is it possible someone drugged you there? As for Sierra, didn't she already explain? She just walked into the wrong room. Or do you actually think I intentionally put her in your bed?" After reading the last sentence, Ethan fell into a sudden silence. Yes, what was he thinking? Evangeline loved him so much. How could she ever push him toward someone else? He remembered the year she first appeared. Back then, his heart was entirely set on Serafina. He hadn't even looked twice at this stubborn girl who claimed to love him, but she never gave up. "I know there's someone you love very much, but I don't care. Ethan, give me a chance and give yourself a chance. Stop being trapped in that past, okay?" When he was at his lowest, she stayed by his side. When he was lonely, she was always there the moment he turned around. 4 years ago, during a car accident, she had instinctively shielded him with her own body. Later, when he asked why she would risk her life for him, how did she answer? She said, "Loving you is my mission, Ethan. I will love you forever." His thoughts returned from his memories, and the suspicion he had felt instantly vanished. She loved him so much. How could she push him to another woman? Seeing that Ethan didn't press further, Evangeline gave a self-deprecating smile. She had indeed loved him too much in the past, which was why Ethan felt she would never leave him. But love can be drained away by repeated disappointments. Ethan, a true departure is never a loud argument. It is silent and invisible. After this, Evangeline knew she couldn't be too obvious, so she stopped making moves. Until one day, Ethan suddenly approached her and suggested going to see a meteor shower. Serafina happened to be walking by and heard him. She immediately spoke up with excitement. "Are you going to see the meteor shower? I've never seen one before. Ethan, can I come with you?" Ethan naturally didn't refuse her request. It was just one more person after all. When it was time to leave, Ethan watched as both women instinctively headed for the passenger seat. He looked at Evangeline hesitantly. "Eva, Sierra gets carsick. Let her sit in the front." Evangeline paused, then naturally withdrew her hand. Her expression showed no sign of distress as she nodded and opened the back door. Okay. It wasn't that he didn't know she got carsick too. He simply instinctively chose to favor the woman he truly loved. Perhaps because of the meteor shower, the mountain was exceptionally crowded that day. The car crawled along the road, and before long, Evangeline's face turned pale. The mountain road was narrow, and the car couldn't go all the way up. They had to get out and walk. As they followed the crowd up the mountain, Evangeline, who was already dizzy from carsickness, was suddenly hit by a massive force. She was knocked off balance and fell to the ground. A sharp pain in her ankle made her cry out, but she realized hers wasn't the only scream. She looked back and saw Serafina looking piteously at Ethan with a crumpled expression. From their positions, Evangeline immediately knew who had shoved her. Hearing the commotion, Ethan quickly turned around and saw Serafina looking like she was about to cry. "Ethan, I accidentally twisted my ankle. It hurts so much." The moment she spoke in that soft voice, Ethan's heart tightened with worry. "Let me carry you up the mountain, okay?" He coaxed her gently, his focus entirely on the injured Serafina. He completely forgot about Evangeline, who had also twisted her ankle. Evangeline didn't say a word. She forced herself to stand up. Fortunately, since he was carrying Serafina, she was able to keep up with them. When they finally reached the summit, Evangeline was about to take a breath and rest when Serafina suddenly let out a cry. "Oh no, I left my camera in the car." He looked at her dotingly, his voice full of gentle frustration. "I'll go get it for you." Evangeline looked up and saw Serafina glancing her way. Alarm bells rang in her head. Sure enough, the next second, Serafina smiled and said, "It's okay. Let Evangeline go with me." With that, she grabbed Evangeline's hand and pulled her toward the path down the mountain. As soon as they were out of Ethan's sight, she stopped and looked at Evangeline with a triumphant smile. "Evangeline, it was your birthday yesterday and I forgot to give you a gift, but it's not too late." She took out her phone, tapped on it for a moment, and then held it in front of Evangeline. It was a photo of a diary. The handwriting was bold, elegant, and familiar. Evangeline recognized it as Ethan's immediately. Sierra chose someone else. After years of guarding her, she still doesn't belong to me. Sierra accepted his proposal. She clearly knows I love her, yet she asked me to be the best man. She's just taking advantage of the fact that I love her and can never refuse her. Fine, as long as she's happy, I'll walk through fire for her. Sierra isn't doing well. She doesn't know that I wait under her window every day, sometimes for hours, sometimes all night. If she ever turns around, she'll see I'm always there. Today, I met a girl who likes me. She says her name is Evangeline Quinn. She says she came here for me and will love me forever. But I don't care about anyone else's love. My only wish in life is for Sierra to see me. I don't ask for much, just a little more love every day, from days to months, months to years. I don't care if her love is thin as long as it is long. As she scrolled through the photos, she could almost see Ethan sitting at his desk, writing these words with a devoted and lingering expression. Every word and sentence was filled with his unrequited devotion and intense love for Serafina. She loved Ethan and couldn't have him, while Ethan loved Serafina and couldn't have her. They were both equally pitiful people. Evangeline was dazed by the photos until Serafina's piercing voice brought her back. You see now, don't you? The person Ethan has loved from beginning to end is me. If you're smart, you'll let go and leave. Otherwise, you'll just end up embarrassing yourself. I will let go, but not yet. Evangeline had always known he loved Serafina. She had just been foolish enough to believe that if she stayed long enough, she could one day replace Serafina in his heart. It wasn't until Serafina reappeared that she realized it was all a delusion. The devoted second male lead would only ever love the female lead. He could never love anyone else. However, she hadn't yet succeeded in matching Serafina and Ethan, so she couldn't leave yet. She turned to leave, but Serafina grabbed her arm. Not yet. When then? Tell me. They were standing near a steep slope. Evangeline frowned and looked around. She didn't want to argue here. She tried to pull her hand away from Serafina's grip. Let go. Tell me first. Serafina refused to cooperate. Seeing that Evangeline wouldn't answer, she gripped harder. One wanted to leave, and the other wanted her to stay. In the struggle, Serafina's foot slipped. As she lost her balance, she fell toward the slope, pulling Evangeline down with her. By the time Ethan realized something was wrong and found them, several hours had passed. Panic-stricken, he finally found the battered and barely conscious Evangeline and Serafina at the foot of the mountain. Ethan! Hearing the noise, Evangeline opened her eyes grorily. When she saw Ethan about to pick up Serafina, she called out to him. In her blurred vision, she saw his body freeze. He then slowly and stiffly turned to look at her. Eva, Sierra is in bad shape. Once I get her to safety, I'll come back for you immediately, okay? Evangeline opened her mouth, but her voice was too weak. He didn't hear her. After saying those words, he didn't stay. He hurried away. She couldn't stop him. She could only wait, but as the minutes and hours passed, he never returned. The sky grew dark and the temperature dropped, causing her consciousness to fade again. In her grogginess, her survival instinct kicked in, and she bit her tongue hard. The sharp pain brought her back to reality. Her eyes were filled with determination. She couldn't die here. She had to go home. No one was coming to save her. Even if she had to crawl, she would get out of here with that sheer willpower. She actually managed to crawl, bloodied, onto the road where cars passed. The moment she saw someone, her tense nerves snapped, and she lost consciousness completely. When she woke up, she was in the hospital. She finally saw the man who had promised to come back for her. Eva, you're awake. He looked nervous and relieved to see her awake, but Evangeline just stared at him. After a long silence, she asked raspily, "Why didn't you come back for me?" His face stiffened. It took a long time before his eyes reddened. Sierra was in a very bad state. I took her to the hospital first. After the examination, we found out. She was diagnosed with cancer some time ago. She came back to say goodbye to me. She was afraid I'd be sad, so she kept it from me. The news was such a shock that I forgot to come back for you. Eva, you can hit me or blame me, just don't be angry with me, okay? Evangeline didn't answer him. Instead, she called out to the overseer in her mind. The overseer, does Serafina York really have terminal cancer? No, she found a doctor to forge the documents. The overseer responded quickly. The mechanical voice confirmed her suspicion. She curled her lips. After a while, she looked at Ethan. Since that's the case, you should go take care of her. Hearing this, he looked touched. He gave her a light hug before pulling away. Eva, I'm so lucky to have such an understanding girlfriend. Sierra doesn't have much time left. Once I've spent her final days with her, I'll come back to be with you, okay? During the following period, Ethan spent all his time with Serafina. Evangeline never questioned him. Once her injuries were fully healed, she discharged herself from the hospital. After returning home, the first thing she did was check his diary. She turned to the last page. Only one sentence was written there: Sierra has terminal cancer. When I heard the news, my first thought was to follow her in death. If she dies, I won't live either. But she didn't think about what that unfinished sentence meant. She just smiled, closed the diary, and put it back in its place. The next day, Serafina was discharged from the hospital under Ethan's care. She said that if she were to die, she wanted to die in a place she was familiar with. A few days later was Serafina's birthday. Ethan personally organized a celebration for her that was even grander than the one he had for Evangeline. Since you're unwilling to leave, I'll let you see for yourself exactly how much Ethan loves me. Maybe then you'll give up for good. She raised an eyebrow triumphantly, but Evangeline remained calm, as if she hadn't even heard the provocation. Instead, she asked a different question. You'll be making a wish later, right? Of course, at the mention of making a wish, she became even more boastful. He'll give me whatever I wish for now. Evangeline shook her head, her voice faint. In that case, make this your wish. With that, she leaned in and whispered something to Serafina. Serafina's breath hitched. She looked at her in disbelief. 20 minutes later, a massive cake was rolled out. The candles were lit and Serafina's eyes sparkled. Ethan, will you grant me whatever wish I make? Yes, he nodded dotingly. Having received the promise, she couldn't help but glance at Evangeline. Then her lips curled into a smile. Then, I want to marry you. The room went silent with shock. Ethan's breath hitched. For some reason, he instinctively looked toward Evangeline. Seeing his lack of response, the light in Serafina's eyes faded, and tears instantly filled her eyes. The tears were like a heavy hammer striking his heart. Suddenly, he couldn't think. Panic-stricken, he began to coax her. Okay, we'll get married. She finally smiled through her tears, took Ethan's hand, and ran out of the hall. I've heard that Mr. Shelton was obsessively devoted to Miss York. It seems it's true. Of course, don't you remember? The moment he heard she was having a hard time abroad, he immediately gave away half his fortune just to help her establish herself. Doesn't his current girlfriend also been with him for many years? It seems no one can compete with the first love. Once she's back, all those years of companionship become a joke. Someone noticed Evangeline standing in the corner with red eyes, quietly crying. They assumed she was heartbroken that her years of devotion couldn't match the return of his first love and looked at her with pity. But only she knew she was crying out of joy. Joy that Ethan Shelton was marrying Serafina York. Joy that her mission to match them was complete. Joy that she was finally going home that night. After the guests had left, Ethan came back and immediately held Evangeline with an apologetic look, explaining softly. Eva, Sierra doesn't have much time left. The doctor said it's best to fulfill her wishes. That's why I agreed. It's just a fake marriage. Please don't be angry. He thought it would take a lot of effort to comfort her, but she wasn't sad at all. She looked at him calmly. I know. Sierra is sick. She should be the priority. Let me handle the wedding arrangements. I'll give you both a perfect wedding. During the following period, Evangeline was busy organizing the wedding dress, shoes, venue, and everything else. She handled almost everything herself and endured all of Serafina's provocations. She never fought back and tried her best to fulfill even Serafina's most demanding requests. After a period of hard work, she became visibly thinner. Once I've spent this final time with Sierra, we'll be together properly, he said, seeing her exhaustion. He was filled with guilt. Hearing his words, Evangeline gave a slight smile. Properly? There is no properly anymore. Ethan Shelton, as soon as you get married, I can go home. The night before the wedding, Evangeline cleared out all her belongings and threw them into a fire, one by one. When Ethan saw this, his pupils shrank. He rushed forward. Eva, what are you doing? This will be your marital home. It's not right for my things to stay here. She gave a faint smile and offered a casual explanation, but panic began to rise in his heart. I told you, it's all fake, I know. But we have to make it look real. Her face was calm, and her hands didn't stop. As she threw items into the brazier, she spoke of their origins. "These are the love letters I wrote to you. Back then, you were so obsessed with Sira that you threw them away every time you saw them. This is the scarf I knitted for you. You were so jealous when Sira knitted a scarf for someone else, so I made one for you myself." She threw them in one by one until everything was burned. Ethan had never felt so panicked. He held her and confirmed repeatedly, "It's all fake, it's all fake." She nodded seriously, her response still the same, "I know." On the wedding day, many people attended. During the ceremony, Evangeline personally handed Serafina over to Ethan. For some reason, even though both Serafina and Evangeline were standing right in front of him, he felt uneasy, as if something was about to vanish from his life forever. He took Serafina's hand, but his gaze remained fixed on Evangeline. As he left, he offered a worried instruction. "Eva, stay in the car behind us. Don't worry, I won't do anything out of line." She smiled and nodded. Even though she was close, he felt like she would disappear at any moment. He didn't know that, at that very moment, the mechanical electronic voice sounded in her mind again. "Congratulations to the host for the successful completion of the mission. Once your physical body dies, you can leave the mission world and return to your original world." This time, Evangeline smiled a genuine smile. Ethan, who was looking back every few steps, was momentarily dazed when he saw that smile. Although he had seen her smile often lately, it had been a long time since he'd seen her smile so sincerely from the heart. "Ethan, what's wrong?" Serafina was puzzled by his sudden stop. Before she could look, Ethan snapped out of it and led her into the car. "Nothing. It's late. We should head to the hotel." Evangeline obediently sat in the car behind them and followed them to the hotel where the wedding was held. When they arrived, the others followed Ethan and Serafina into the venue, leaving Evangeline far behind. Once the others were gone, she walked toward the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. The hotel was very tall, and the wind on the roof was strong. It rustled her skirt, but her gaze was fixed on a large screen nearby. Ethan and Serafina's wedding was being broadcast live across the city. Standing here, she could see the entire wedding on the screen opposite her. She watched them exchange vows with eyes full of love. She watched them exchange rings. Finally, as the master of ceremonies on the screen shouted, "You may now kiss the bride," the overseer appeared again. "Host, the time corridor has opened. You may leave the world." The moment the voice faded, Evangeline took one last look at the screen. On the screen, Ethan was looking at Serafina with tenderness, slowly leaning toward the blushing woman. She took a step forward. "Ethan Shelton, I'm going home. Our paths have diverged. You go your way, and I'll go mine." From now on, Ethan Shelton's life will no longer have Evangeline Quinn in it. The foot that was already on the edge of the tall building stepped into empty space thud inside the hotel. Ethan was confused. The wedding was proceeding normally, but for some reason, his heart was beating frantically. He instinctively scanned the room, but couldn't find the person he expected to see. He froze. Panic surged in his heart. He had seen her following behind them before entering the venue. Why had she disappeared? The master of ceremonies prompted the kiss, and he felt a tug on his sleeve. He snapped back to reality and lowered his head with a look of feigned affection. He thought that she probably loved him too much to watch him marry someone else, even if it was fake. He promised himself he would make it up to her when this was over. He hadn't intended to actually kiss her, but as he leaned in, his palpitations grew more intense. He instinctively looked toward the side of the hall. Beyond the transparent glass wall, a figure was falling from above. Even though it happened quickly, Ethan clearly saw that face. It was Evangeline Quinn, the woman he had been searching for in that moment. The string of his sanity snapped. Ethan's pupils constricted, and his mind went blank. Suddenly, he couldn't hear anything. Only one thought remained in his head. He had to save Evangeline. "Eva," he stumbled toward the window, but how could a person's speed match the speed of gravity? Despite the soundproofing, as he reached the window and looked down through the glass, he still heard a loud thud in his ears. The guests in the hall were startled by his sudden movement and fell silent. A moment later, those closest to the glass wall began to scream. Someone jumped immediately. The entire hall fell into chaos. Serafina watched as her almost completed wedding descended into a mess. The groom had shoved her aside, and the guests were rushing to leave. All of this was because of that Evangeline Quinn she had claimed she was bringing them together. But in the end, she always stole Ethan's attention. Serafina's face twisted with rage. Her anger destroyed her reason. She ripped off her veil, threw it on the ground, and stomped on it. Then she adopted a piteous expression and approached him, clutching her skirt. Ethan, to her shock, Ethan, who would usually drop everything to comfort her if she cried, shoved her aside violently. Eva. I have to find Eva. He stumbled to his feet, not even glancing at Serafina as she fell. Ethan looked as if he'd lost his mind as he ran out with the crowd. The elevator finally reached the first floor with a ding. He fought through the crowd and ran outside. Discussions were buzzing outside the hotel, mingled with the sound of sirens. He was deaf to everything. His eyes were only on the blood-red scene behind the police tape. He rushed toward it like a madman, but was blocked as he drew near. "Sir, you can't go in there right now." The officer's words made Ethan lose control. He became agitated and began pacing at the edge. "That woman is my girlfriend. Why can't I go in?" Girlfriend. The officer maintaining order looked at his outfit and the groom boutonniere on his chest. He then glanced at the bride in her wedding dress chasing him from the hotel entrance. A strange look flashed in his eyes. Was he marrying one woman while being another's boyfriend? But that wasn't his business. He explained patiently, "The scene is still being processed. We need to protect the evidence and investigate the truth." As the words fell, Serafina finally caught up. Her angry questioning was about to erupt, but her gaze instinctively drifted toward the center of the cordon. Jumping from a high building was a tragic way to die. It could only be described as horrific. Serafina had wanted Evangeline to die, but seeing it with her own eyes made her scream uncontrollably. She stumbled back and collapsed onto the ground. "Ethan!" She reached out with a trembling hand to grab Ethan's trouser leg, wanting him to take her away. But he moved his foot away, refusing to leave. He looked at the officer stubbornly. "When can I take her?" "After the cause of death is determined." The officer was professional but not unkind. However, the cause of death was very clear. The police didn't spend much time on it. 3 days later, Ethan received the news that he could take Evangeline's remains. On the day he went to bring her back to the villa, Serafina blocked his path with tear-filled eyes. Her grievance was palpable. "Ethan, we're married now and she's dead. Why are you still going after her?" Hearing her question, Ethan looked confused. "It was just a fake marriage, Sira. Eva is my girlfriend. My true girlfriend. The woman he was supposed to marry and spend his life with." He tried to push past her. After a moment of shock at his words, Serafina's eyes filled with disbelief. She hadn't expected such an answer. "Fake marriage?" she murmured in disbelief. After a while, she suddenly laughed. "Are you trying to tell me now that you actually love Evangeline Quinn?" Ethan stopped in his tracks. A flash of confusion appeared in his eyes. Love? Evangeline? He had never really considered the question. In his heart, he thought his feelings for Evangeline were just a matter of responsibility. He had always believed he loved Serafina. But when she mentioned it, he suddenly realized something. If he didn't love Evangeline, if he loved Serafina, then why wouldn't he stay with Serafina now that Evangeline was gone? Why was he still holding onto his agreement with Evangeline and calling the marriage fake? But when he thought about staying with Serafina without any guilt, he found he couldn't do it. After a moment of thought, his gaze became firm. He looked at Serafina and pursed his lips. "I'm sorry, Sira. I can't leave her like this." With that, he turned and left. Behind him, Serafina had a total breakdown. She screamed at him in rage. "You were obsessed with me when she was alive, and now that she's dead, you decide you can't leave her." But her voice was left behind. Only he knew how much he heard or cared. An hour later, Ethan carefully brought back a body that had been repaired, so it wasn't as terrifying, and placed it in the living room. He gently stroked her hair, his face full of guilt and self-reproach. "Eva, I'm sorry. It was my fault. I didn't give you enough security. But why couldn't you wait for me? If you had waited, I would have sent her away and stayed with you. You have such a temper leaving me just like that." He leaned down, intending to kiss her forehead, but he didn't notice the jealous Serafina approaching him. Just as his lips were about to touch her, she shoved the small bed holding the remains. "Ethan Shelton, have you lost your mind? She's been dead a long time." The piercing voice made Ethan frown. He didn't have time to deal with Serafina. He rushed to catch the falling remains. But he was too late. The remains hit the floor, but there was no sound. Instead, the moment the body touched the ground, it began to dissolve into nothingness, starting from the point of contact and spreading through the entire body. In the blink of an eye, it vanished completely before their eyes. Ethan felt a buzzing in his head, as if he'd been struck by a hammer. He stood there dazed, unable to believe his eyes. Ah, she's a monster. It wasn't until Serafina's scream echoed that he realized what had happened. Instantly, his eyes turned blood red. He frantically searched under the bed and the surrounding area, murmuring, "Where's Eva? Where's my Eva? How can this be?" But she was gone. No matter how hard he searched, he couldn't find her. Watching Ethan continue to search desperately, even wanting to hire people to dig up the floor, Serafina reached her breaking point. She rushed forward, grabbed his phone, and smashed it onto the floor. Then came a loud slap. A stinging slap landed on his face, forcing his head to the side. "Ethan Shelton, wake up, she disappeared right in front of us. She's a monster. How long are you going to stay crazy over that monster?" Her chest heaved with rage, but it wasn't enough. Her mind was racing with complex emotions. She couldn't tell if it was jealousy, disgust, fear, or confusion. She grabbed his chin and forced him to look at her. "Ethan, isn't it me that you've always loved? Otherwise, why would you marry me? Can't we just be happy together? Why do you have to stay obsessed with her? What kind of spell did she cast on you to make you suddenly care about her so much?" Serafina didn't want to give up on Ethan. In this city, he was the only one with enough power to stand up to the original male protagonist. He was the best option she had left. But those words made Ethan snap his head up and stare at her with a chilling gaze. It was as if he'd suddenly remembered something. Yes, why had he married Serafina in the first place? Because she said she'd been diagnosed with cancer and didn't have long to live. Because the doctor said she shouldn't be stressed, or she'd be in mortal danger. But since the wedding day, she'd had numerous breakdowns. Does she look like someone who doesn't have long to live? He finally noticed the inconsistency. His eyes narrowed. The next second, he grabbed her throat, his voice cold. "You said you had cancer. Why haven't I seen any symptoms?" He slowly tightened his grip, making it hard for her to breathe. She couldn't speak, so she couldn't explain. But Ethan hadn't intended to let her explain anyway. He took her straight to the hospital. He specifically chose a different doctor to give her a full examination. After an expedited process, the results were soon in his hands. The results were exactly what he expected. She was perfectly healthy. Ethan's face was dark as he entered the waiting room where Serafina was. He threw the report in her face. "So this is the cancer and the short time left you were talking about." Now that her lie was exposed, Serafina showed no panic. She looked as if she'd won, or perhaps she simply had nothing left to lose. She looked up, revealing the red marks on her neck, her eyes fearless. "Yes, I forged the cancer diagnosis. But so what? I didn't force you to punish her for me, and I didn't force you to marry me. You were the one who was indecisive. It's no wonder she'd rather die and disappear than have anything to do with you." "It's no wonder," she said. "She wanted to bring us together before she died." Ethan was stunned by these words. "What do you mean, bring us together?" Seeing him look like he'd been struck by lightning, Serafina felt a sense of satisfaction. Her eyes curved into a malicious smile. "Exactly what I said. Remember that time I fell down the stairs? She actually came to see me. She said there was no need to target her. She said she wanted to bring us together. Otherwise, do you think any woman would actually be okay with her boyfriend sleeping in the same room as another woman, the woman he's been obsessed with for years? Did you actually think you were drugged at the party, and I just happened to walk into the wrong room? Let me tell you, she drugged the water, and she's the one who called me there. And on my birthday, the idea for me to wish for a marriage was hers too. Ha 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 ha, Ethan Shelton, you're a complete fool. She gave up on you long ago, and you were still planning a proposal, thinking it was the surprise she wanted most. You're so pathetic." Truth after truth hit him like a heavy hammer, one after another, nearly knocking him unconscious. Had she been planning to leave him from the very beginning? But he should have seen it coming. Or perhaps he had known her cancer was fake, but for some reason, he had chosen to believe it without hesitation at the time. Whenever it came to Serafina, he knew his choices weren't the best ones. He knew he was hurting Evangeline. But it was as if a force were pushing him to make those choices, telling him, "You should love Serafina York. You should put her first. Everyone else should come second to her." As for Evangeline, he had noticed her strange behavior. From the day Serafina moved into the villa, she had changed. She stopped caring about Serafina's presence. She let him interact with Serafina. She stopped being angry when he punished her based on Serafina's lies. She had even personally organized their wedding. Back then, he had said, "Eva, I'm so lucky to have such an understanding girlfriend." What was she thinking when he said that? Ethan finally realized how foolish he'd been. He had been so confident that Evangeline loved him so much she'd never leave him. He had ignored her and hurt her with total disregard, showing obvious favoritism toward Serafina, yet he thought he could just coax her back afterward and everything would return to normal. But it was all just his own delusion. In an instant, Ethan looked as if he'd aged 10 years. He looked broken. He couldn't stay any longer and fled. Watching him leave, Serafina felt relieved. She took nothing and booked a flight on her phone. She left the hospital and headed straight for the airport. He was a madman. She couldn't stay here. The next flight was in 40 minutes. She waited in the lounge, her heart tightening as the minutes passed. She had to get away from here. Attention passengers for Costa Rica, Flight UA2991 is about to depart. Passengers who haven't boarded, please go to Gate 4. We wish you a pleasant journey. Thank you. When the boarding announcement sounded, Serafina's heart finally settled. She hurried toward the boarding gate. Just as she was about to scan her ticket, she was blocked by a group of bodyguards. "Sira, where are you going?" A low, raspy voice whispered in her ear like a demon. In that moment, her hair stood on end. She turned around mechanically and saw Ethan Shelton, who had just fled in despair, now looking at her with a half smile. She didn't speak, just looked at him warily. The boarding announcement sounded again. He listened to it, and when it finished, he suddenly laughed. "Costa Rica. I've heard the scenery is nice. A good choice." Ethan nodded, seemingly impressed by her quick thinking, but then his smile vanished and his eyes grew dark. "But Sira, both of us are responsible for Eva's death. Now she's gone without a trace. Why should you get to flee the country and live a comfortable life? You should stay with me and spend eternity atoning for what you did to her." Meanwhile, in the real world, Evangeline Quinn woke up. She saw a pure white ceiling, and the sharp smell of disinfectant told her where she was. She tried to sit up, but her entire body felt incredibly stiff. Her phone was nearby. She picked it up, and when she saw the date, she was stunned. 3 years. She had spent 12 years in the fictional world, but only 3 years had passed here. The overseer appeared in a flash of gold, and its mechanical electronic voice answered her confusion. Time flows differently in different worlds. The host completed the mission 5 years ago, so the timeline you return to is the one linked to your first mission completion. "The mission is over, host. This will be our last meeting. I wish you a happy life." "Goodbye." The overseer's voice faded, and the golden light vanished. "Wait!" The words left her mouth, but it didn't stop the overseer from leaving. Looking at the empty space, she felt a strange sense of loss. Her heart felt empty. To be honest, the overseer was her savior. 3 years ago, she had been in a serious car accident and fallen into a coma. She had been given several terminal notices and was on the brink of death. The overseer appeared then and took her to the fictional world, telling her that if she completed the mission, she could return to her original world with a healthy body. Even when she refused to leave, it still gave her a second chance. But Evangeline didn't even get to say goodbye before it vanished like a dream. She was lost in thought when she heard a sudden thud at the door. She turned her stiff neck and saw 2 figures, a man and a woman. In front of them was a lunch box on the floor, its soup spilled and smelling delicious. When she saw those 2 familiar faces, her eyes grew red and filled with tears. "Mom, Dad," her raspy voice was unpleasant, but it snapped Arthur and Martha Quinn out of their shock. Tears instantly began to fall. "Eva, my Eva, you're finally awake." Martha Quinn rushed forward and hugged her, sobbing uncontrollably. Arthur Quinn watched with tears in his eyes but didn't interrupt. Instead, he hurried out of the room. "I'll go get the doctor." Tears soaked the shoulder of her gown. Evangeline hugged her mother, feeling a surge of emotion. She had been so ungrateful leaving such loving parents for a man like Ethan Shelton. But fortunately, it wasn't too late. She had a long life ahead of her, and she had plenty of time to be with her parents. It's a miracle, after an examination, Dr. Miller's frown relaxed, and his eyes were filled with amazement. Waking up from a persistent vegetative state was already a miracle, but for all her vitals to return to near normal levels so quickly was a miracle among miracles. And now, Evangeline Quinn was that miracle. Remember to be active in your physical therapy. Even though your vitals are normal, you should maintain a light diet and avoid overeating. Dr. Miller gave many instructions. Arthur and Martha Quinn took them all to heart, fearing any mistake might cause irreversible consequences. Only Evangeline knew that after her experience with the overseer and the mission, this was indeed a miracle. She silently thanked the overseer in her heart. Arthur and Martha Quinn pushed her in a wheelchair as they discharged her from the hospital and headed home. After all, she'd been lying down for 3 years. Although her vitals were normal, her movement was still a bit difficult. That was why the doctor insisted on physical therapy. "Mom, Dad, I'm sorry. I was ungrateful and made you worry. I'll make it up to you from now on." After returning home, she looked at her busy parents with a sense of guilt. Martha Quinn gently rubbed her head with a look of maternal affection. "As long as you're okay, that's the best reward for us." Evangeline recovered quickly. Once her health was restored, her first concern was her career. Before the accident, Evangeline had just graduated with a master's degree and was about to enter the professional world when she fell into the coma. Now, she had to re-enter society, which would likely involve many challenges. What are you afraid of? The Quinn estate is large enough to support a daughter. Do whatever you want. You're so talented, and your parents are here to support you. Hearing Evangeline's concerns, Arthur Quinn chuckled and patted her shoulder. When she was choosing her major, they hadn't intervened or forced her into finance or business management. They let her choose what she liked. She had actually completed a dual degree in finance and achieved excellent results. So Arthur Quinn wasn't exaggerating. If she wanted to, she could take over the family business at any time. Evangeline hugged her parents, feeling a wave of emotion and guilt. During those 3 years, her parents had not only worried about her health, but also paved the way for her future. She'd almost failed such wonderful parents. "Mom, Dad, thank you. Thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for never forgetting me." 3 years after waking up, Evangeline's law firm was running smoothly, and the overseer never appeared again. Her life was back on track, and the memories of the mission faded. The more time passed, the more those 12 years felt like a very vivid dream. As time went by, she began to forget the details of that dream. In the other world, in the basement of the Shelton villa, Ethan Shelton looked at Serafina York, who no longer looked like the pampered woman she once was. He felt no sense of satisfaction. After years of being imprisoned in the dark basement and suffering daily mental and physical torment, she looked haggard and miserable. When he approached, she shrank into the corner. "I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. Please, please let me go. I promise I'll stay far away." Serafina York groveled, but she received no mercy from Ethan Shelton. He still didn't intend to let her go. He looked at her calmly, as if he were looking at a dead object. A bowl of spoiled food surrounded by flies was placed in front of her. He looked down, his voice indifferent. "This is your food for today. You can choose to eat it or not. But until this bowl is empty, nothing else will be brought in." With that, he turned to leave, but before he could take a step, his ankle was grabbed. He looked down and saw a blackened hand gripping his ankle. It was Serafina, who was chained up. She looked up with hope, her voice pleading and trembling slightly. "Ethan, it's been so long and you've tortured me for so long. Please, let me go. I really know I was wrong." And since she disappeared so strangely, maybe she's not dead. Ethan shook her off with a look of disgust. A dark handprint was left on his white trousers. "Whether she's alive or not, Sira, you have to pay the price." His calm tone was chilling. Serafina's heart went cold. For 7 years, he'd kept her in this dark basement like a dog. No matter how much she pleaded, he only had one thing to say: "You have to pay the price." She finally collapsed in despair. But what had she actually done? What price was she supposed to pay? She laughed bitterly and looked at his back, her eyes filled with intense hatred. "Yes, I admit I was malicious toward her, but I never actually harmed her. Haven't you been the one harming her all along? Why are you pretending to be so devoted and pure? Ethan Shelton, you're the one who deserves retribution." She screamed the last sentence with all her strength, a piercing, sharp scream that struck his heart. He didn't respond, but as he left, he instinctively touched his left ring finger. Under his glove, there was no sign of anything unusual, but a squeeze would reveal that the finger was missing. He had cut it off himself. It was his own self-punishment. As he had said, both of them were responsible for Evangeline's death, so neither of them should escape. He touched his chest, where he tattooed the initials EQ Evangeline Quinn. This served as a constant reminder that Evangeline Quinn was the one he loved, and he must never forget her. Usually, touching the tattoo gave him the illusion that she was still with him. But this time, for some reason, panic surged in his heart again. The last time he felt this was on his wedding day with Serafina. And then, he had seen her fall right in front of him. What would it be this time? Evangeline was already dead. How could she leave him again? He shook his head, trying to ignore the panic. He went back to his room and picked up the photo frame on his desk. There was no photo in the frame, only a painting. In the painting, Evangeline was smiling with eyes full of love for Ethan Shelton. The artist was very skilled. This was the most accurate representation of her face he could get based on descriptions. But a painting was just a painting. It could never compare to a photo. Unfortunately, on their wedding day, he had seen her burn everything related to her. Thinking back, he felt immense regret. If he'd been more observant, if he'd managed to save even one of her belongings, he wouldn't have to look at a painting to remember her. But there is no medicine for regret. His fingers gently stroked the frame, but Serafina's words echoed in his ears. Maybe she's not dead. Thinking about how her body hadn't been found after 7 years, his eyes filled with a sense of loss. Eva, are you really not dead? I miss you so much. I want to see you again. Mr. Shelton, his murmuring was interrupted by a bodyguard rushing in. He frowned in displeasure. If a gaze could kill, the person would be covered in wounds. The bodyguard was terrified but had to report. Mr. Shelton, Miss York, she's committed suicide. As the words fell, a sharp palpitation suddenly occurred. It was intense and rapid. For a moment, he felt dizzy. The world blurred, and the sounds of commotion faded away, leaving only a constant ringing in his ears. The next second, he blacked out completely. When he regained consciousness, Ethan felt he was in a strange world. There were clusters of golden light and various characters floating in the air. The golden lights moved back and forth, sometimes stopping to greet each other. They looked like unique living organisms. In that moment, he remembered what he'd seen when Evangeline's body disappeared. It had dissolved into nothingness, and in that nothingness, he'd seen flashes of gold and characters. They had appeared and disappeared so quickly that he hadn't thought much of it. But now, seeing similar characters and lights, a realization dawned on him. While he was speculating, a series of alarms sounded. The golden lights all stopped and gathered in one area. His heart jumped, and he followed them. An light screen appeared. Ethan looked up and was horrified by the images on the screen. The scene on the screen was his villa. Warning, warning, the world's female lead is dead. The sub-world is about to collapse. Immediate maintenance required. As the alarm sounded, the images on the screen became chaotic. One moment, it was Serafina York and the original male protagonist's romance, while he followed them, broken and hiding in the shadows, watching them in pain until he died alone. In that version of the story, Evangeline Quinn never appeared, but after a series of glitches, the story changed. Evangeline Quinn suddenly appeared by his side, smiling at him. I know there's someone you love very much, but I don't care. Ethan, I came here for you. My mission is to love you. A sense of absurdity rose in his heart. He began to run around, and many silver spheres he touched showed light screens. Scene after scene unfolded, showing various worlds. There were modern worlds like his, ancient worlds, and also fantasy, primitive, apocalyptic, and future worlds. The golden lights didn't seem to see him, so he reached the center without any hindrance. And there, at the control center of all those worlds, he saw that each world corresponded to a book. It was only then that Ethan finally understood why Evangeline had disappeared without a trace after her death. It was because the world he lived in was fake. He stumbled back and bumped into something. A beam of light fell on him, and another piercing mechanical voice sounded. Warning, warning, unauthorized soul detected, red lights flashed. He tried to run, but the light beam pinned him in place. Golden lights began to gather around him. The chaos ended when the system responsible for maintaining his world recognized him and released him, sending him back to his original world. He finally realized that the first ending he'd seen was his original destiny: unrequited love dying in loneliness. And he finally understood why, whenever Serafina York appeared, he'd choose to believe her without question, even if it didn't make sense. It was because he was programmed to have unrequited love for Serafina York. As for why he was able to break free later, it must have been the chain reaction of world anomalies those systems mentioned. But who was Evangeline Quinn? Was her death real or fake? Would he ever see her again? Ethan didn't know, and no one was there to answer him. When he was sent back, he found that time had reverted to before Serafina's suicide. His eyes flashed with a sense of madness. He dismissed all the bodyguards and entered the basement again. Serafina's reaction was the same from pleading to cursing. He took out a knife, his eyes filled with a certain madness. "Sira, don't blame me. You owe this to Eva. I just want to see her again." His low voice reached Serafina's ears. She stared at the knife, and terror surged in her heart. She shook her head and pleaded. But the next second, the knife plunged into her chest. The pain made her eyes bulge, and blood flowed from the wound. Soon, the familiar dizziness returned. His second time in the system space, Ethan went straight to the control center. He stared at the Overseer system and said only one thing: "I want to see Evangeline." The Overseer ignored him and sent him back immediately. In the basement, Serafina had just recovered from the terror of death when she saw Ethan rushing in again. The memory of the knife in her chest made her dizzy with fear, and she instinctively shrank back. But she soon realized something. Fear wouldn't help. To stop his madness, she had to act unexpectedly. Ethan didn't notice anything unusual. After all, her reaction was always the same. He waited for her to go from pleading to cursing, but instead of leaving, he drew closer. Just as he was about to take out the knife, she suddenly attacked and headbutted him. He was caught off guard and knocked to the ground. The next second, she grabbed the knife and, with eyes full of hatred, plunged it into him. Warm blood splattered on her face. She closed her eyes, her heart rate gradually slowing down. She laughed at him. "You claim to love her so much. Well, you can go join her." Within a minute, the Overseer saw Ethan for the third time. Even without a face, the system's frustration was evident. Finally, it sighed, "You can't go to her world." Those words destroyed his last hope, but they also gave him another answer. His Evangeline wasn't dead. She'd just gone to another world. "Why?" he asked desperately. The Overseer didn't answer. Looking at the cause of the world's collapse, the system was nearly at its breaking point itself. The mission to redeem the second male lead was created because too many people couldn't accept his original ending. But now, the system doubted the mission's validity. Seeing him staring stubbornly, the system finally gave in. It couldn't keep him here, but if it sent him back, he'd likely keep killing the female lead. The Overseer finally made a compromise. "I can't send you to her world, but I can give you a light screen. It will show you her life in that world, but you can't communicate with her. You can only watch. In exchange, I will send you back to before Evangeline Quinn appeared. You cannot harm the female lead or hold any malice toward her." Ethan wanted to protest, but seeing the system's firm stance and remembering his previous experiences, he nodded and agreed. Another wave of dizziness, and Ethan was back at the beginning. In the sound of reading, someone tapped his shoulder. "Ethan, we're planning a group dinner this weekend. Are you coming?" Serafina York's familiar voice came from behind him. He froze and turned around, catching a glimpse of himself in the window. He was wearing a school uniform, his face young and innocent, his eyes full of confusion. "Ethan, what are you daydreaming about?" Seeing no response, Serafina asked impatiently, tapping him again. "Of course Ethan is going if our school bell is inviting him," someone teased. Serafina blushed and muttered, "Don't talk nonsense. We're just friends. If Julian misinterprets, I won't forgive you." Another round of teasing followed. Ethan stared for a long time before realizing this was their junior year of high school. This dinner was when Serafina accepted the original male protagonist's confession. "I'm not going." His voice was calm, but it stunned everyone. This was the first time Ethan Shelton had ever refused an invitation from Serafina York. "Ethan, are you sure? This is Sira's invite," someone asked in disbelief. But he pushed his desk aside, stood up, and interrupted. "I said I'm not going." With that, he hurried out of the classroom, skipping class entirely. Ethan went straight home. He didn't care about Serafina or Julian Sterling, he just wanted to see if the system had lied to him. He rolled up his sleeve and saw a black letter near his elbow. He tapped it, and a light screen appeared. As the numbers on the screen increased, his heart beat frantically. Finally, the numbers reached 100, and Evangeline Quinn's face appeared on the screen. His eyes were filled with longing, but then he saw the man beside her. Evangeline Quinn was already with someone else. She and Julian Sterling were walking home together. Actually, she was quite satisfied with him. Although it was an arranged meeting with business implications, she could tell that his manners and upbringing were top tier. After talking, they found they had many common interests. Living with someone like him, even if they didn't develop intense feelings, would be a comfortable and respectful relationship. And fortunately, they actually liked each other. Does a man as successful as Mr. Sterling also need blind dates? She asked playfully. Julian Sterling heard the teasing in her voice and laughed. That smile was like a needle to Ethan's heart. She had started a new life, and she seemed to have completely forgotten him. He didn't want to see her with someone else, but it had been so long since he'd seen her. Ethan tried to ignore Julian Sterling and stared hungrily at the face he hadn't seen in 7 years. Eva, I miss you. 5 years after returning to her original world, Evangeline Quinn got married to Julian Sterling. At the wedding, they smiled, one in a long-trailed wedding gown, the other in a sharp suit. They were a beautiful couple, and the room was filled with congratulations. The officiant stood before them with a smile and spoke the vows. Julian Sterling, do you take Evangeline Quinn to be your wedded wife, to love her, comfort her, honor and keep her, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, and be faithful to her as long as you both shall live? He looked at her with tenderness and answered without hesitation. I do. Evangeline Quinn, do you take Julian Sterling to be your wedded husband, to love him, comfort him, honor and keep him, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, and be faithful to him as long as you both shall live? She looked back with a brilliant smile. I do. Julian Sterling placed the sparkling diamond ring on her finger. Her eyes were filled with love. Ethan Shelton sat in the audience, dazed by the scene. A year ago, the light screen was upgraded with a projection function. Since then, whenever he watched, he'd choose a position as close to her as possible. He'd stand by her side when she went home, reaching out to hold her hand as if they were actually walking together. He'd sit beside her when she had dinner with Julian Sterling, looking at him provocatively as if Evangeline still loved only him. The system didn't allow him to target Serafina, and he didn't want anything to do with her anyway. At least his Evangeline was alive and well. And even without his intervention, Serafina and Julian's story would still end in tragedy once the plot was over. Without him to pick up the pieces, her life wouldn't be easy. Ethan didn't stay in the same city as Serafina after high school. People were shocked and confused. They'd all noticed his feelings for her back then, even if he thought he was hiding it. Only Ethan knew he'd planned to leave since junior year. He was only afraid to leave. He was afraid that if a second Evangeline Quinn appeared, she wouldn't be able to find him if he'd moved away. But by the end of high school, no second Evangeline had appeared. He finally accepted the truth. The system had sent him back to a world without her. Taking the lessons from his previous life, he achieved success in business by his sophomore year of college. He was seen as a brilliant entrepreneur, but he was still unwilling to accept it. He had actually fallen in love with Evangeline in his previous life, but he'd been controlled by the plot, causing him to hesitate between her and Serafina. But he had never actually wanted to leave her, yet she had decisively ended things and left him forever. With the light screen, he discovered that time flowed differently in their worlds. 11 years in his world was only 5 years in hers. Ethan didn't know whether to be happy that they hadn't been apart for that long in her eyes, meaning she might still remember him, or whether to be sad that after only 5 years, he no longer had a place in her heart. He felt a surge of bitterness, but he realized he didn't even have the right to be bitter. He was the one who pushed her away. Now that she loved someone else and was married, he had no right to intervene. After all, in her world, he was long gone. In the 7th year after returning to her world, Evangeline Quinn gave birth to a daughter. On the day of the birth, many people waited outside the delivery room, Arthur and Martha Quinn and Julian's parents. But the father, Julian Sterling, was missing. Ethan was annoyed and muttered a few complaints. He sat across from the parents, waiting anxiously as if he were the father. He kept murmuring, "Please let Eva be safe. Please let her be safe." Evangeline's cries of pain could be heard from the delivery room, and occasionally he could hear her shouting at Julian. He felt both heartache and amusement, but also a sense of bitterness. If he hadn't wavered because of Serafina, they would likely be married and having a child now. Would she have called his name when she was in pain? If those things hadn't happened, their child would be in kindergarten by now. Instead, she was giving birth to another man's child, and he could only wait outside. Ethan stared at the delivery room light, and after a while, his eyes grew red. "Eva, I regret it. I regret losing you." He didn't know how long he waited, but after a loud cry, a nurse came out carrying a chubby baby with a joyful expression. "It's a girl 7 pounds, 8 ounces. Very healthy." The parents gathered around, and after a brief look, the nurse took the baby for cleaning. They then waited for Evangeline to come out. A few minutes later, she was wheeled out. Ethan then realized that Julian Sterling had been in the delivery room with her all along. The thought of himself waiting outside filled him with bitterness again. When Evangeline was moved to the ward, the baby was already in a small bed beside her, sleeping soundly. The moment she saw the baby, her expression softened. Ethan saw the intense maternal love in her eyes. "Have you chosen a name?" she asked softly, as if afraid to wake the baby. Julian shook his head, and his mother explained, "You went through so much to bring her into the world, so we wanted you to name her." Evangeline didn't refuse. She looked around and saw the frost on the window. The sun finally broke through the clouds, lighting up the surroundings. After a moment of thought, she spoke. "Let's call her Scarlett Sterling." Ethan murmured the name and walked over to the small bed. The baby was still very small, and it was hard to tell who she looked like, but he somehow felt she looked like Evangeline. Scarlett. It was a beautiful name. Everything was settled, and Evangeline fell asleep. He sat by the bed, touching her and then Scarlett. Even though he couldn't actually touch them, he felt satisfied. There was no one else here, just them. Suddenly, Scarlett seemed to feel something. Her chubby little hand moved and reached toward him before falling back down. She wasn't discouraged. She kept laughing and reaching out. Ethan's heart jumped. When she reached out again, he caught her hand. Even though he couldn't feel anything, her hand stopped exactly in his palm. It was so small, not even half the size of his palm. Even though Ethan knew the child wasn't his, seeing her smile made his heart melt. This was Evangeline's child, so she was his child too. She curiously tried to squeeze his hand, but it ended up being a pat. Perhaps she pat too hard, because her hand fell right through his. Scarlett looked around with her dark, intelligent eyes. The blurry shadow was gone. A baby doesn't remember things. One moment she was wondering where the shadow went, and the next, she was sound asleep. In the other world, Ethan's heart was racing. Scarlett had seen him. According to the system, no matter how the light screen was upgraded, the two worlds would never intersect unless a time corridor opened. So, the most he could do was watch her through the screen. But Scarlett's hand had stopped in his. Did this mean he had a chance to go to her world? No one could answer him unless he saw the system again. And the only way to see the system was if the world collapsed. He hurried to the kitchen and found a knife. Without hesitation, he moved to cut his wrist. Beep, 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 warning subject showing suicidal tendencies again. Immediate intervention required, the piercing alarm nearly burst his eardrums. He was briefly stunned by the sound. His mind went blank. With a thud, the knife fell to the floor. A golden light appeared, filling the room. It was the system responsible for this world. It rushed over and pressed several things around him. He felt its resentment and heard its complaints. "I knew you'd cause trouble. Fortunately, I installed a monitoring alarm on the screen. If you have any thoughts of suicide or murder, I'll be notified immediately. Don't even think about collapsing the world. The world can only be restarted a limited number of times. You only have one chance left. If it restarts again, everyone in this world will be destroyed. I suggest you give up on that idea." When he recovered, the golden light was gone, as if it had been a dream. Only the knife on the floor told him it was real. The last chance, he laughed dismissively. If it meant going to her world and seeing her again, he didn't care if everyone else died. He picked up the knife again, his thoughts racing. As the blade cut his skin, he heard the system's frantic voice. "I already let you see her, what are you doing now?" I felt the time corridor opening. I know you can send me there. Blood dripped down, and his face grew pale. He looked at the system and made his final deal. I just touched her daughter. You said the worlds would never intersect without a time corridor. His eyes were firm. He had already decided. As for the devoted second male lead role, he was done with it. He'd already broken free from the plot, so leaving wouldn't cause any problems. The system was silent. Without its power, Ethan couldn't enter a time corridor even if one existed. But it had given him the light screen to monitor him, and because of the system's power attached to it, he'd accidentally entered the natural corridor Scarlet had opened. The anomaly the system detected earlier was because of him. Now that he knew, he'd definitely cause chaos if the system didn't let him go. It sighed and asked, "Are you really willing to give up everything here and go to her world, even if you have nothing?" He nodded firmly. "You have the status of the second male lead here. Besides your unrequited love, you have everything. Why aren't you satisfied?" The system was confused. Ethan froze at the mention of unrequited love, so that was his destiny. No matter who he loved, he was destined to have unrequited love. It was true for Seraphina York, and it was true for Evangeline Quinn. No wonder Seraphina and Julian were happily married in this version of the story without his intervention. It was laughable. His ending was predetermined in this world. "I don't care about anything else. I only want Evangeline." After understanding the truth, Ethan spoke with determination. "If that's what you want, I will fulfill it." The system took the system power from the light screen and manipulated the space. An invisible corridor appeared. Ethan couldn't see it, but he felt the energy. "Follow it to the end, and you'll be in her world." The mechanical voice sounded meaningful, but he didn't notice. He rushed toward the corridor. The corridor was very long. The system watched him go and sighed. Ethan didn't know that in this world his destiny was controlled, so he was destined to be alone. But as the saying goes, when a door closes, a window opens. He'd lost his family life, so he was destined to succeed in business. That was the benefit of his status, and now he'd given that up. On the day of Scarlett Sterling's first birthday party, an uninvited guest appeared. 6 years for her, 14 years for him. Fortunately, he'd restarted his life, so they were still similar in age. But once he arrived in this world, he finally understood the system's meaning. Ethan had thought that his reappearance would win back Evangeline Quinn and make his dreams a reality. But he'd forgotten that in this world, Evangeline was married and had a child. It was an arranged marriage, but not without love. In comparison, their previous relationship had ended in a mess. After entering the venue, he hid in the shadows, his gaze fixed on the stage. There, Evangeline and Julian Sterling were walking together, with Julian holding the intelligent-looking Scarlett. Perhaps she'd caused enough trouble before birth, because Scarlett was a very well-behaved baby. She didn't cry and smiled at everyone. If she was hungry, she'd murmur. If no one noticed, she'd suck her thumb. But eventually, she learned to crawl and talk. When she was hungry, she'd crawl to an adult and say, "Mommy, hungry," or "Daddy, eat." Evangeline loved taking her to parties, and she was used to it. But this time, for some reason, she insisted on being held by Evangeline. Evangeline took her and spoke softly. "What's wrong, Letty?" One little hand wrapped around Evangeline's neck while the other pointed to a corner. She whispered in Evangeline's ear, "Mommy, that man, that man." Evangeline didn't quite understand, but she gestured to Julian and walked toward the corner. There were many people around, so she didn't get too close. She stopped when she saw a blurry figure. She didn't recognize him. She frowned and asked, "Who are you?" People with invitations didn't usually hide in corners. Most people were there for networking. The figure moved and took a step forward. She instinctively stepped back, looking guarded. He paused, then stepped into the light so she could see his face. His expression was bitter. "Eva." Just a name, but it seemed to take all his strength. She looked at him with a flash of confusion. He knew her name, but she didn't seem to recognize him. Scarlett giggled. She had a good feeling about him. She vaguely remembered a man with a similar scent who had played with her once. She reached out for a hug. Evangeline was surprised by her reaction, but stayed guarded. "Who are you?" Ethan had imagined many scenarios for their reunion. He thought she might be happy to see him, or calm, or even angry. But he never expected her to look at him with confusion and ask who he was. "You've forgotten me?" He was in disbelief. He had kept her name in his heart for 14 years, and yet her first words to him were to ask who he was. Everything he wanted to say collapsed. Ethan finally realized his sacrifice was in vain. She hadn't just refused to forgive him. She'd completely forgotten him. He looked broken. Seeing his reaction, Evangeline tried to remember if she knew him. After a while, she finally matched the face to a name in her memories. Ethan Shelton? How? Did you get here? She thought he'd be with Serafina York. Ethan tried to explain, but bitterness filled his mouth. You forgot me. You actually forgot me. Evangeline shook her head. She didn't understand his pain. I thought everything between us was over. In other words, she had no reason to remember someone irrelevant. No, Eva, His eyes were red. He wanted to say he loved her. He wanted to ask for a second chance. He didn't care about her marriage or her child. He'd treat Scarlett as his own. But, Eva, do you hate me? He asked with difficulty, not knowing if he wanted her to say yes or no. Evangeline shook her head. She handed Scarlett to someone else and looked at him. I have a new life now. There's no need to hold on to the past. I see those memories as just a story, a relationship where I loved the wrong person. I've always been someone who can let go. See, I'm doing very well now. Ethan, I don't know how you got here, but now that you are, live your own life. My only wish is that you don't disturb my life again. Finally, I hope you enjoy the party. She nodded and turned to leave. He spoke behind her. Is there really no chance for us? His voice was choking up. She stopped and looked back with a brilliant smile. Ethan, I'm happy now, happier than I ever was with you. With that, she walked away without looking back. He stood there alone, his eyes filling with tears. Ethan finally got the answer he'd waited 14 years for. There was no chance for them. She was happier now than she ever was with him. In the distance, Evangeline picked up Scarlett and wanted to ask about Ethan, but Scarlett whispered in her ear, Mommy, I don't like that man. The baby looked indignant, and Evangeline smiled. She didn't want to ask any more questions. Julian Sterling finished his networking and walked over. He looked confused. What don't you like? She smiled. Nothing. It's not important anymore.